All right, we got some more here of the Andrew Tate versus Piers Morgan debate. And this time, Piers Morgan is going to bring up Ben Shapiro to Andrew Tate. And what follows is just sheer, raw, pure entertainment. Tate goes off on Shapiro. Watch this.
Constructive. I have nothing against the guy.
Let me turn to Ben Shapiro. So let me assure you, as someone who's not pimped women and bragged about it, the morality requires that those who rape women and kidnap women must be eradicated, not negotiated with. He says on my show, I won't be lectured on morality and toughness like Andrew Tate. His great idea of toughness and morality is pimping women and bragging about it on air, and then trying to quasi-walk it back while simultaneously maintaining many of the same positions and flexing his biceps. Listen, everyone should be able to tweet whatever it is they want. I'm all for an open discourse, even with people who I think are dead wrong on a lot of issues. But Andrew Tate is dead wrong on a lot of these issues. And the particularly ridiculous posturing about being yes, you're very tough when you want people to make peace with terrorists who've just murdered their children. Very, very tough. What do you say to that?
So Ben is a warmonger. Ben has been wrong on basically every single issue you can name. He was with you with the vaccine and every other war. Ben is always calling for other people's young men to go and die in some war. He seems to love it. I don't know if he has short man syndrome, but he's always behind his desk calling about how important it is that big, strong men like me go and die. And the reason he tweeted that and said that is because when Hamas and Israel, at the very early in the conflict, I think it was 3 days in, were discussing possible peace talks, he tweeted, no, absolutely not, fuck them, kill them all. And I said, Ben, as a man who's done his own fighting, because I've had a life of pain and violence, listen to me. Peace is always worth a conversation. What I said is that we should always be prepared to at least discuss peace. He, because he's a warmonger, said, no, peace is not worth a conversation. You're this, you're that, da-da. Because he's always sitting behind his desk. He must have a booster chair, and he's always running his mouth trying to invoke violence and call for war. And I find it kind of hypocritical because a man who's so small he would die if he was slapped on the street, sitting behind a desk and screaming for other people to be annihilated, I think is kind of, it's worse than hypocritical.
I actually think,
Oh, that's good. Oh, I enjoyed that. Look, the point that he's making, which is absolutely undeniable here, is that Ben Shapiro is a warmonger. Man, you go back and read some of the articles he wrote and his commentary back during the Iraq war days, the war on terror, war in Afghanistan, all that stuff. I mean, he wrote articles that were like, now, to be fair, he has since retracted this one because it's so extreme, but one of them was, I don't care about civilian casualties. It happens in war. Get over it. It's fine. That was one of the articles he wrote. He was the biggest neocon hawk on the issue of the Iraq war. And every step of the way, when the goalposts were moved, he was there to be like, I agree. I'm still with this. First, they said Saddam Hussein worked with Osama bin Laden to attack us on 9/11. He was like, great, true, let's go get him. Then when it turned out that wasn't true, and they moved the goalpost to, he has weapons of mass destruction that he's going to use against us, he's like, sure, great, go get him. Then they move the goalposts again to, actually, that's not true either, but he's just a really bad guy. He's just a dictator, and he's kind of evil, so we want to go after him. He's, good enough for me, Ben said. Let's go. Keep on going. And as a direct result of the wars he advocated for, the U.S. spent $7 trillion. Actually, that's just Iraq when you count the interest and extrapolate out to 2053. Another $2 trillion for Afghanistan. So we're talking about $9 trillion. We're talking about war profiteering by the military-industrial complex to the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars. We're talking about thousands of innocent U.S. soldiers dead. We're talking about minimum 200,000 innocent Iraqis dead. We're talking about the crime of the century, at least up until what Israel's doing right now in Gaza. Maybe they surpassed in this short period of time. But the crime of the century, and he was there cheerleading it every step of the way. And like Tate points out, look, these guys are hawkish, but they don't mean, give me a rifle, I'm going to go fight. They mean, let's send young American men and women, usually from poor families, let's have them go do the dirty work. I mean, it's grotesque. Let's keep going.
Insane.
I believe if he was sitting and listening to this, he would say that what he's screaming for is for Jewish people in Israel to defend themselves. And
All
he's a Jewish
Ben
man.
does is call for war. And I agree. Defending yourself.
That's not all he does.
That's all he does. And calling for war and defending
That's not all he does. That's all he does.
yourself is very different than genocide. And Ben, like I said, overall, most of Ben's worldviews and mine probably align. We don't align on the...
Yeah, that's the problem, Andrew. That's the problem. And there is one very clear area where Ben Shapiro is far superior to you, which is he never sex trafficked women. So got to give it to Ben on that one.
Religious sect. We don't rely on the religious points. Fine. But our overall worldviews about how society should function probably align on many of the key issues. I don't have a beef with Ben, and I don't watch his show, and I have no idea what he talks about a lot of the time. But what I do know is every time I turn it on, he's calling for someone else's son to go and die in a ditch somewhere for his interests. And I don't like people who are not advocates for peace. Blessed are the peacemakers, said Candace, who's far more intelligent than Ben will ever be. And she is completely right. He replied that rhetoric, starting an argument with me, when I said we should talk about peace. I say we should talk about peace. He calls for the death of civilians, and somehow we're asking why my point of view is seen as abstract. It's insane. Why can't we all just sit down and say the fighting must end? Why can't we do that? Why can't we sit and say, nobody should be dying, let's stop using the most advanced military weaponry on the planet to blow the limbs off children? Why can't we say that without being deemed some kind of terrorist sympathizer or anti-Semite?
Ben would say, yeah, but nobody said after 9/11 that America should do a ceasefire, that America should negotiate for peace. They said, go get him, and that's what we were doing, and that's what we want to do here in Israel as well. That's what he would say. But of course, the response to that is, nothing could have been worse than how the U.S. reacted after 9/11. Every single move we made was, at best, a mistake. At best, a horrendous mistake and misstep. And that's kind using that sort of language. I'm granting the idea of this like bumbling, fumbling empire making mistakes, when in reality, a lot of these things were purposeful, right? We purposefully wanted to take out the head of Iraq, and they had a whole list. The neocons had a whole list in the Project for a New American Century, all the countries we want to topple to get more favorable puppet regimes in there. But he thinks that's a good, nobody stopped you guys after 9/11, so you better do that for us now. And it's like, first of all, people were protesting and saying, don't do this, it's terrible. Second of all, people should have listened to those folks. So now we say for Israel, and he acts like it's crazy. But look, the fact of the matter is, this, as bad as this is for Palestinians, it's also making Israel much less safe in the long run. What do you think is going to happen? You are breeding more Hamas members every single day. You're creating them more and more by the day. And what are those people going to do? How extremely radicalized are they going to be? And you're also baiting in Hezbollah as well. You're baiting in Iran as well. Because when you're so hawkish and so over the top and you're humiliating the Palestinians, and there's other Muslims look at that and they're like, geez, you're really forcing our hand here. Maybe we will have to get involved in a certain way. So it makes Israel less safe is the point. You're making Israel less safe. If you ask me, well, Kyle, how should Hamas have been dealt with after October 7th? I think the answer is relatively straightforward. I think the first thing you do is go to where we know the leaders of Hamas are, the top Hamas officials. You know where they are? They're in Qatar. We know that. So step one, pay off the Qatari government and either arrest all the Hamas members or pay them off and then go in there and kill the top Hamas members. So it's sort of like the decapitation strategy. You get rid of the top of the organization, and then in some instances, the rest of the organization will crumble. There'll be a vacuum, and they'll fight amongst themselves to see who the next leader is going to be. But that's step number one. And then step number two is exactly what Jocko Willink, former U.S. Special Forces, said. He's like, you basically do the opposite of what Israel is doing now. You go in there with a massive amount of humanitarian aid. You try to protect the civilian population. You gain their trust and get them to flip on other top Hamas officials who were behind the attack. You go and get those officials. And then, of course, you begin the conversation for a true and lasting peace deal. The details of that we don't need to get into now, but you actually have a negotiation. You could have the Palestinian Authority take over Gaza. That's what the U.S. indeed floated at one point, but Israel's totally against that. But you have the Palestinian Authority take over Gaza. You negotiate for a true and lasting peace deal. And, this is what you do, but there's no appetite for peace, right? It is only appetite for war. And so on that front, Andrew Tate is 100% correct. That's exactly where Ben Shapiro was at.
Insanity. Trump came along and didn't start a single war. He's the only one who didn't. And they're going to come along him and say, make him a bad...
And that's where he falls off a cliff. It is not true, Andrew. It is not true. The idea that Trump is some sort of peacenik. He increased drone strikes by 432%. He kept us in Iraq. He kept us in Afghanistan. He tried to coup Venezuela. He ripped up the Iran agreement, which was working perfectly, and now we're closer to war with Iran than we've ever been before. The list of foreign policy mistakes. I mean, he hired frickin' John Bolton and Gina Haspel. These are the neocons. These are people that are like Ben Shapiro. So I hate it when people, Trump's anti-war. My ass cheeks, he's anti-war. He's not even close to anti-war. Who are you kidding? So anyway, we can stop here, but it was enjoyable watching Tate go after Ben Shapiro. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.